bivalves are filter feeders, which means they suck in water when they're open. They suck in water and filter out any of the plankton that's in there. Excuse me, that's in the water. We've got a very large bivalve right here. This is a southern quahog. Very, very big shell, one of our largest local bivalves. Completely shut, so that's how you can tell it's alive. When this one opens, as well as the ponderous arc, when it opens, it only opens about that much, just a few millimeters. Most people think that these open up like this, because in a cartoon they're always drawn like that. There's usually a pearl and a scuba diver's trying to steal it. In real life, they don't do that. Most species of bivalve only open up a tiny little bit. There's a couple species that might go maybe like that, but most of them just don't open up very far. So if you're at the beach and you find one that's together, don't try to pry them open. Some you won't be able to. This quahog, I know I will not be able to pry it open. My fingernails are just going to tear off long before I am able to do anything. But some species you could. Some species you could pry them open a little bit. But if you go much further than that, it's going to start hurting the animal. You're going to start basically tearing the animal in half. They're attached to the shell. This shell, both of these two shells, are a body part. These animals are permanently attached to their shells. They never leave the shell. It's a body part that they grow. So this southern quahog has these lines on it that you can see. These are old outside edges. They just add out here and get bigger, up, out this way, on both shells at the same time. So right up here is where they're adding to. So they never, ever, ever leave their shell. The shell is a permanently attached body part. They don't shed, they don't molt, they don't go on vacation, they don't, change houses. They've got the one shell for their entire life or one pair of shells for their entire life. The other group of mollusks that we find a lot of on the beach and that we like to collect are called gastropods. Those are all the animals that we know of as snails and slugs. So on land in your backyard, the snails that are eating your vegetables, the snails that are leaving slime trails on your sidewalks, those are all gastropods, those are all mollusks. That's the same group that we find in the ocean. In the ocean, people tend to be more specific and they say what type of snail it is. They don't just call them all snails, they say what family they are. So they say conch and whelk and tulip and murex and auger and cirrus. That's just what type of snail they are. So if you go out and you look for birds, you can just say, oh, I saw a bunch of birds. Or you can say, I saw finches and parrots and eagles and herons. You're being more specific about what type of bird they are. That's the same thing that we do when we talk about the gastropods that live in the ocean. So in this divider over here, we've got some fighting conchs. And we actually got two fighting conchs that live over here that are right in the corner right now. These guys move around a lot. The fighting conchs are grazers. They eat primarily seaweed and algae. So they're kind of like little bunnies. They'll kind of do a step, eat some seaweed and algae, do another step, eat some seaweed and algae. So these two, when you come up to get a better look, you'll see what look like kind of goalposts. They look like goalposts sticking up. Those are eye stalks. The eyes are right at the end of those. Those are kind of going up. There's something that looks like an elephant trunk going around like that. That's called the proboscis, and that has the mouth at the end of it. So when they're feeling around like that, they're looking for food, which for them is mostly seaweed and algae. These two that are right next to each other, one's actually feeling with its mouth on the other one's shell. It's just trying to see if there's seaweed there to eat. These two are not trying to eat each other. If you're at the beach, you probably don't have this nice clear of a view, you probably have a little rougher water. So most people at the beach end up picking up a shell before they can tell if it's alive or not. So if you're at the beach and you find a gastropod, you want to look inside of the opening to see if it's alive or not. And just like a land snail, they've got a foot that they crawl around on and they'll kind of scrunch it up a little bit. So this fighting conch, you can see the foot sticking out right here. This kind of soft, sluggy part sticking out right here. There's actually a hard part attached to the back of it that's basically a fingernail, a toenail sticking off the back, called an operculum. And that's something else to look for in some of the other ones that I'll show you in just a minute. But if you see soft, sluggy stuff, just assume it's alive. So that operculum is called by many people the trap door. Fighting conchs don't really use it like a trap door. Most of the other species in this tank have an operculum that they pull shut behind themselves like a trapdoor. So that's where this name comes from. So if you look inside this opening, there's this perfectly fit, flat, hard part laying inside there like a door inside of a doorway. It's not kind of weird shells all shoved in at a different angle. It's laying flat. This one is very depressed, far down inside there. It's probably laying about here. Some species it'll be laying right on the outside. It also depends kind of how much they've grown and kind of some different things. But in any case, it's always laying flat like this. It's not kind of other shells shoved in. So that's why they call it the trapdoor. And if you see that, that's also one that's alive. And the reason that I keep telling you how to tell what's alive if you go to the beach is because in Lee County, which is where we are right now, Sanibel and Captiva are part of Lee County, it's illegal to take any of these live animals from the beach. So if you find a live one, you are legally required to put it back where you found it. That live shelling ban actually falls, a lot of things fall under the live shelling ban. The way it's written, basically, if you don't have a fishing license, does anybody in here have a Lee County saltwater fishing license? No? Then no one in this room is allowed to take any live animals from the beach. It doesn't really matter which group it's in. So if there's a hermit crab living inside that shell, squatting inside the skeleton basically, that also has to stay at the beach. If there's barnacles living on top of a dead shell, that has to stay at the beach. This is another thing actually that a lot of people find that accidentally gets taken because they don't realize it's a live animal. This is a ponderous arc. The ponderous arc is obviously alive, so it has to stay. But if you're at the beach and you just find one of these empty shells, and this purple thing growing off of it that looks like a plant that has hair on it. That was just person hair. That's not part of the shell or anything. This looks like a big purple plant. This is actually a false sea fan. This is a colony of animals. This is kind of like looking at a coral head. It's hundreds of individual animals making up one functional colony. So this still has a lot of purple on it, or they can be orange or yellow. If they've got that bright color on it, assume that it's alive and it has to go back. There's a couple in the tank over there in that 90-gallon that just look like black twigs. They're kind of swaying in the breeze. There's water movement in there, but if it just looks like black twigs, those ones are dead. Those ones are you're allowed to take. It's just the skeleton that's left over. But these are actually an animal. It's living on the outside of this shell. The ponderous arc is not being hurt. There's no harm coming to this ponderous arc. It's just plastered on the outside, so it's not going through the shell at all. The ponderous arc is neutral here. It's not being hurt. It's also not being helped. The sea whip is getting, or this false sea fan is getting a nice home, so it's benefiting. That means this is a relationship called commensalism. If the ponderous arc was being hurt, it'd be a parasite. Most people are familiar with that. If it was helping the ponderous arc, that would be a symbiotic relationship, symbiosis or mutualism. Most people are familiar with that relationship as well. Most people, though, aren't familiar with this commensalism, where one thing benefits and the other is just neutral. It doesn't really matter if it's there or not. So this one also actually at the beach has to go back for a couple of different reasons. So any live animal, they've got to go back. We actually have a lot of live animals in here that are buried. A lot of them bury themselves in the sand to avoid predators. And in the tank, a lot of these animals are predators. So in this divider, we've got three different large, different size of horse conchs. This horse conch here has its foot suction cupped onto the front of the tank. There's a horse conch right here, about the same size, that has its foot suction cupped onto the bottom of the tank. So he's not letting you pick him up. No, not cooperating. And then another larger one here in the back, who is also not cooperating. So they can suction cup on to the side of the tank and to the bottom of the tank. If I sat and poked and prodded, they would let go. But that's extra stress for them. It would risk breaking the outer edge of the shell. It would risk kind of hurting their foot or their siphon or the other soft body parts. So we don't force them up. When we're doing a tank talk, we don't force them up if they don't want to come up. But these horse conchs, as well as every horse conch, are predators. They are predators of other gastropods. So this banded tulip that's over here on the edge, on the divider, this is in here as food for these horse conchs. These horse conchs won't eat anything else. They won't eat dead stuff, they won't eat fish flakes, they actually won't even eat this bivalve. They just don't register this as food. The only thing they think of as food is a live snail that they've killed themselves. So in this divider over here, we have a lot of other gastropods that eventually may become food for the horse conchs. We put them in here. But some of these are not very easy for us to find. So this true tulip, for instance, this is only maybe the 4th true tulip that I've seen alive in the 1.5 years that I've been here. The horse conchs love true tulips. When we just had the tank upstairs, whenever we found a true tulip, it had a day or two before the horse conch would eat it. So because we can't find these very often, and we know the horse conch will eat other things that we can find a lot of, we try and keep them a little bit separate to have a little bit of control over who eats whom. But at the end of the day, many of them are in there as food for each other. This true tulip over in this divider will eat some of these other predators. So there's an apple murex right up at the front of the tank and another small one on the divider. Those apple murex could become food for the banded tulip. The banded tulip might eat those. The apple murexes are also predators. They are some of the ones that drill holes. So if you're at the beach and you see one perfectly circular hole that looks like a human used a tool, not a squiggly line, not a teardrop, not polka dots, but one perfectly circular hole, a murex or a moon snail, there's a couple snails that do this, used its mouth to drill through that shell specifically to eat that animal alive. So those guys, we call them drillers. They drill through a shell to eat it alive. So a lot of these animals are, especially the gastropods, are actually eating each other, both out in the wild. If it happens in the wild, that ends up happening here in the tank as well. Some of them, though, aren't necessarily predators. Some of them may be scavengers and other types of feeders. We've got in here detritivores. Scavengers are one type of detritivore, but a scavenger generally is just eating dead meat. Detritivores eat all sorts of dead stuff and decaying matter and poop and leftover sheddings and egg cases. Basically nature's garbage. That's what detritivores eat. So there are some very small species that we have in here, a couple of different species that, and when you come out to get a better look, you might see some really, really small things. Those are in here as basically a cleanup crew. They are not a necessarily glamorous part of an ecosystem, but they are a very, very important part of an ecosystem. And in the tank, we try and keep it as much as possible like a little ecosystem, just like you would see out at the beaches. All right, does anybody have any questions? No? Yes?
How many species are there?
Globally, there's about 60,000 gastropod species, including land and freshwater, and about 10,000 bivalve species. Locally, we have, between all of them, about 350. Yes, local saltwater species. Yes.
Can any of these live like out of water?
For a period of time. Most of them can survive a low tide, a couple of hours. None of them are going to be able to live longer than a day out of water. Most of them just a couple of hours. Any other questions?
How often they do eat?
It depends on what they're eating. These fighting conchs are basically either feeding, resting, or mating. That's kind of the only 3 things they do. With the horse conchs, they eat kind of like snakes. They'll have one big meal, and in a couple of weeks, they'll have another big meal. If it's a little meal, maybe once a week. So it depends kind of what they're eating, and then, reproduction and shell growth, it kind of varies. Yes?
Are horse conchs specialists?
Yes, they are extremely specialist apex predators. So they'll only eat other gastropods. Yes?
Why does the horse conch take some time to eat its food?
The horse conchs usually take at least overnight. Usually we see nothing happening when I leave for the night, and I come back in the morning and I just find an empty shell.
And why do they eat?
Oh, why do they take so long in between? If they had the opportunity, they would probably eat a lot more than that, but it's a